Hello everyone, I'm Jordana Van of Ravenlight Holistic Healing and welcome to Monarch Butterfly as a Totem. This video is intended to be viewed in tandem with my video on butterfly as a totem because I won't be talking about the qualities and challenges inherent to being a butterfly person in general here. Instead, this video covers the additional specific characteristics and challenges that go along with having not just butterfly, but monarch butterfly specifically as one of your totems. To easily find the video on butterfly totems in general, just visit the video library on my website at www.ravenlightholistichealing.com. Normally, my channel members are in charge of which videos I make, so if you want a shot at having me make a video about your totem or spirit guide, become a channel member, being sure to read which perks go with which tier. But this video is actually a birthday gift for one of my oldest, dearest friends, the incredible Heather Jacobs of the Fancy Garden. Heather is a butterfly person extraordinaire. She's an artist, a gardening expert, and a fun and all-around gorgeous human being. And if you want to learn how to grow the most incredible flowers in the most unlikely environments, or if you just love videos and photographs of stunning plants and flower arrangements, check her out on Instagram and Facebook at The Fancy Garden or at thefancygarden.com. Happiest of birthdays to you, my dear friend. For all of my viewers, don't forget to like, subscribe, click the bell, and click all. And if you'd like to become a channel member, details are in the video description. And if you enjoy my work and just want to make a one-time donation, in which case, thank you, you can do so by clicking the new Super Thanks button, the little heart below. So let's get started. Monarch butterflies were named for King William III of England, originally the Prince of Orange, Orange being a place located in what is now southern France. The legend says that when he was still a prince, some early European settlers in North America so adored him that they gave the name Monarch to this exceptional orange butterfly. Historians are not 100% sure whether or not this is true, but the legend is enduring enough to make it symbolically valid. So first off, let's start with the connotations of having a totem whose very name represents royalty and adoration. In the most direct sense, you need to feel like a king or queen in your life. With regard to your relationships, this doesn't mean that you're constantly bossing people around or being waited on, but that your court, meaning your family, most especially your romantic partner and close friends, demonstrably value and respect you and feel honored to be with you. This also means that they want to be their best for you. You're the king or queen. You could have anybody, but you chose them. And it's important that they comport themselves with the understanding that you could still have anybody else and that the time and energy you give to them is valuable. This is how you really feel loved and secure in relationships, so lazy slobs need not apply. Right now, the King of England is celebrating her Platinum Jubilee, and this is a huge deal. So think about how important you would feel if you could say that you were a personal friend of the Queen's. Monarch people want to feel that their partners and closest friends and family members see them in the same way. It's also important for you to feel respected in other arenas of your life. In your career, you want to feel that others see you as the one with the wisdom and experience to serve as an authority in your field. We'll talk more about the significance of the color orange in just a moment, but orange is the color of the second chakra, which is directly linked to creativity and productivity. You want folks to see you as the queen or king of the creative realm and to adore your creations. This is one reason why, when you're not being actively productive and creative, you start to freak out just a little bit. A lot of your identity is predicated on being viewed as a prolifically creative sort of person. Hand in hand with being seen as a king or queen is an emphasis on physical appearance that alternately pleases you and drives you nuts. You will usually be someone who knows how to make themselves look absolutely lovely and for whom beauty is important. But when you don't feel beautiful, it can make you fiercely cranky, again, because it's directly linked to feelings of security in being seen as someone worthy of adoration. You want to stand out. The enviable thing about butterfly people is that no matter how old they are, they never lose that youthful, ethereal quality that so obviously sets them apart from others. 2, they've usually got a finely honed sense of style, a knack for choosing the perfect haircut, makeup, jewelry, and or clothing to flatter their features. They're always going to catch people's eyes. Now, even though you as a monarch person really are inherently regal and deserving of all of the perks therein, there is a part of you that will usually doubt it, and this can cause you to fall prey to some serious self-criticism. Your personal bar is way up here, seriously high, because you innately recognize that it can be. You can be the person that everyone else wants to be, but in fearing that you're never going to reach that bar, or perceiving yourself as sometimes falling short, you can be merciless with yourself about what you think you should or should not be doing, and this often means vacillating between whether or not you should just give up altogether or forcing yourself to try 1,000 times harder. This is most likely to occur when you are in one of those uncomfortable spans of lower productivity, perceiving your downtime, which you were probably enjoying and really do need, as we'll talk about in a bit, as wrong, wrong, wrong. This pattern is linked to the existence of the Viceroy butterfly. Monarch butterflies are poisonous if consumed by most vertebrates, and it was long believed that Viceroy butterflies evolved similar coloration so that predators would avoid them too, an event called Batesian mimicry. However, recent studies have discovered that Viceroys are toxic as well, though not for the same reason. This is called Mullerian mimicry, where two equally toxic species mimic each other and both benefit. Most creatures know to respect the monarch and the viceroy as dangerous and leave them alone instead of eating them. So if you take into account the definition of the terms monarch and viceroy, here you essentially have two rulers fluttering about, the monarch, to whom the throne truly belongs, and the viceroy, the person who serves as representative of the sovereign and is empowered to act in the sovereign's name. And both are treated like kings and queens. If you're a monarch person, it can seem like there are a whole lot of other people out there who do exactly what you do and are garnering praise for it, and who may be more productive than you are. The thing is, viceroys do not have even remotely the same life cycle as the monarch, the latter of whom comes with an entire generation who spends an enormous chunk of their lives in a pseudo-hibernation period in which they do absolutely zilch. Nor does the viceroy species require the same degree of flexibility and stamina. When you're comparing yourself to other apparent authorities in different arenas of your field, and you feel like you're falling short, it's important to recognize that you and they are on totally different journeys and are wired in totally different ways. You aren't supposed to do things on the same schedule as they are. 2, you are still the king or queen, the real McCoy, as it were. People are always interested in whether the butterfly they are seeing is a monarch versus a viceroy because we attach special significance to it being a monarch, aka the real deal. What this means is that these other people to whom you are comparing yourself are probably still doing great work and are worthy of praise, but your creations are still going to be among the best that there are. The presence of the viceroy does not diminish your status as the monarch. Now let's move on to the monarch's striking coloration. The intense contrast between orange and black is what warns potential predators that the monarch is poisonous and therefore should not be eaten. Most things in nature are utterly preoccupied with the basics of survival, eating and mating, and so they aren't going to waste energy chasing something that cannot be consumed. It's a pretty incredible adaptation. With such a dramatic contrast, we're really talking about a creature that experiences internal contrast as well. In this case, swings from one end of the orange spectrum to the other. Orange is the color of the second chakra, and each chakra is related to particular emotions and experiences in life. Here, we're only going to talk about a few second chakra qualities as these are the most significant for monarch people. The first is productivity versus stagnation. The second chakra is where the sexual organs are located and ultimately where life takes root. And so it should make sense that this is where a good portion of our productivity issues manifest themselves. Those non-living things that we create come from the same space within ourselves as biological children. We already talked a bit about monarch people and their frequent feeling that they aren't doing enough or aren't doing things with the greatest degree of excellence. This is heightened by the monarch's contrasting colors, black and orange. Sometimes they are vibrant and enthusiastic and out there, and other times they really just want to retreat into the dark and the quiet. Two, as we'll talk more about in a bit, there's a significant dormancy period required to keep the species going. This period is preceded and followed by a period of serious activity. Monarch people, as a result, experience times of dramatically going, learning and creating like mad, alternating with periods in which they don't really do much at all. Again, because so much of their sense of regal security is tied up with feeling that they're creating things for which they can be acknowledged and admired and respected, they can really beat themselves up during the downtime, blaming themselves for not getting stuff done because they know they can. When this happens, they can manifest issues, physical issues, in the reproductive organs, as these are where we house the energies having to do with some forms of creativity and productivity. They aren't birthing anything. This is really frustrating. Issues here should be a wake-up call that they need to be more understanding of their unique cycle of activity, knowing that they'll get back to the frenetic activity again eventually, and that the downtime has its own value, even if they can't see it. It's often during the peace and quiet of downtime that we suddenly understand ways that we can improve the joy and productivity of our active times, in fact. The next quality of the second chakra that we're going to talk about here is the contrast between times when they are accepting of pleasurable experiences and enjoy the heck out of them, sex, food, shopping, anything that feels physically and emotionally wonderful and has an indulgent quality, and stark asceticism, basically a determination to reject anything that smacks of decadence. This is when they'll put themselves on restrictive diets or spending plans, or they won't let themselves stay in bed any longer than necessary or have fun any longer than they perceive as necessary. For what I'm presuming are obvious reasons, the chakra associated with sex is the one most closely linked to the primal experiences of pleasure. But when we fear the consequences of that pleasure, it can also be where we absolutely close ourselves off. Monarch folks can go from being fabulously happy to fearing that the enjoyment that they are experiencing, kind of this, almost hedonistic pleasure, is going to hurt them down the line. For this reason, monarch people can also cycle through periods of being very interested in sex and times of being utterly frigid. This can be frustrating for their partners, but this too is just a part of their native cycle. Some people just incarnate with a propensity to bounce from one extreme to the other. Pisceans, Geminis, and Libras are those with strong placements in these signs among them. The key isn't to try to stop the extremes from happening, because sometimes they're needed. For example, monarch people are supposed to alternate idleness with intense activity, and their diets too are going to fluctuate to necessary extremes. When you're lying around Netflixing most of the day, you don't need the same nutrient-rich foods that you do when you're working out intensely, for example. So you don't want to beat yourself up or try to prevent yourself from shifting this way and that. Instead, you need to try to determine if you're changing simply because it feels good to do so, even if it makes no sense, or because you're fearful and you think you should make these changes. When it's the latter, you need to take a step back and examine that fear, remembering that the patterns that serve you best are not the same as those that serve others, nor even the majority. Orange is also linked to letting people get close, sometimes very close, versus pushing them away and putting up firm boundaries. The second chakra allows for the greatest degree of intimacy possible, but it also comes with the greatest risk of violation. And so a keen need for personal space tends to begin here. Monarch folks can go from being very social and very open to putting up a wall at a moment's notice. So even though they may be surrounded by others, their energy can be absolutely closed off. This tends to confuse the heck out of those closest to them, but these folks are easily overstimulated and often need to block you out for a while to recover and recenter. When they're keeping you at arm's length, just let them be, and they'll let you back in eventually. Now, if you're familiar with the monarch, you do know that monarchs only lay their eggs on milkweed plants, as it is all their caterpillars will eat. This is because the caterpillars retain the toxins in milkweed, called cardiac glycosides, even into their butterfly stage. Eating a single monarch butterfly, in fact, is sufficient to kill a small animal and sicken larger creatures, and this is what protects the species from being decimated by predators who normally consume butterflies. Other foods have been successfully fed to monarch caterpillars, butternut squash, for example, but this doesn't create the kind of cellular toxicity that is required to preserve the species. Monarchs need milkweed, and only milkweed, though you should keep in mind that there are multiple species of milkweed to survive. Now, I could seriously digress here and start talking about exactly why monarch butterflies are seriously endangered in North America and how that relates in part to the disappearance of milkweed from the landscape, but I'm going to content myself instead with saying that if you live in an area where you can plant milkweed, you should, and that if you do so, really be certain to pay attention to the growing and sowing directions, because it isn't as simple as scattering seeds. Milkweed plants, like the caterpillars they nourish, are very finicky. So, due to the selectivity of the monarch caterpillar, monarch people are often regarded as having a picky nature. These folks go through stages during which they need very specific conditions to make them happy, far more so than most other people. And so they may have a lot of folks in their lives who just can't understand their lifestyle or desires, or why certain very specific things upset or attract them in the way that they do. And these things really may not seem to make any sense at all. They just know that this doesn't feel good, and that doesn't feel good, and that doesn't feel good, but that thing does. Some of this may have to do with their physical constitutions, but a lot of it has to do with what makes them feel calm and balanced and safe. Milkweed protects the monarch in a literal sense, and so being equally selective protects the monarch person's mental and physical health. To this end, monarch people, if you're forcing yourself to do things that don't feel right, stop. It's not good for you, at least not right now. Think about the monarch caterpillar eating non-milkweed substances that will sate its physical hunger, but which will ultimately lead to its being vulnerable to an early demise. And compare this to if something else were to eat milkweed. That something else would die. You're different from other people, and therefore, just because something should be good for you doesn't mean that it is. Whereas what is good for you is very likely to be toxic for other people. Those things that will ultimately serve you may not make any sense, and they may seem ridiculously specific, but they are what you need. And you aren't always going to be like this, I promise. Again, we're in a situation of contrasts. Monarch butterflies will only lay their eggs on milkweed, as this is all their caterpillars will eat, but monarch adults will drink many different kinds of nectar. So as finicky as you may be during certain periods of your life, you can be fairly easygoing in others. Don't try to figure out why. This is just simply how you're wired. A last point here about the monarchs being toxic to other creatures if eaten. You really are here to live a different kind of life from most other people. And it's a life which radiates joy and light and inspiration, color and magic. As backwards as this may sound, this makes you exceptionally toxic to people who get too close to you if they aren't ready to also live colorful, magical lives themselves. People who are determined to be victims, who stubbornly insist that joy only comes on account of luck, or that they can't possibly learn how to be as creative or intuitive or whatever quality of yours that they desire, can become sick with envy and anger when it seems that those things they're hankering after come to you so easily. They don't exactly come to you easily, but to those other people it looks that way. Being in your light can make them focus even more on their perceived darkness, and then they criticize themselves into falling even deeper into their shadows. And this is not something you are intended to concern yourself with fixing, because it's not something you can fix. It's more just something to be aware of. Those who get close to you and are ready to fly will see you as an inspiration and will use your example to propel themselves to their own joys. Those who aren't, won't. You still just have to be you. We're going to finish by talking about the significance of the monarch butterfly's extraordinary migration, the only two-way migration, like that of birds who fly south for the winter and return in the spring, among butterflies. So monarchs have a life cycle that actually requires 4 generations, sometimes 5, but most often 4 to complete. As a result, many monarch folks do find that the number 4 has special significance in their lives, whether this shows up numerologically, so a lot of 4s among family members and friends, for example, or as anniversaries, like getting married April 4th, that sort of thing, or in cycles, such as 4 months or 4 years. The monarch cycle begins when the female monarch lays her eggs on the underside of a milkweed leaf. A caterpillar hatches from the egg, eats all the milkweed it can, and eventually creates a chrysalis from which the butterfly emerges. This is the first generation of summer monarchs, which then mate, lay eggs of their own, and then die. Their eggs start the cycle all over again, hatching, growing, pupating, emerging, mating, laying eggs, and dying, living up to 6 weeks. Those monarchs that emerge as adults at the end of summer are different and have longer lifespans, which is necessary because they're not adapted to survive the approaching winter temperatures. Instead, these monarchs undergo the same cycle as their parents, eating milkweed as caterpillars, creating a chrysalis, etc. But instead of mating and laying eggs, the energy they stored as a caterpillar goes into fueling their migration to a climate in which they can survive until springtime. These autumn monarchs emerge from their chrysalis in a state called reproductive diapause. They literally cannot mate because they don't possess the mature internal sex organs of other summer generations. Starting in late August and continuing through September and October, each monarch will fly 2,000 to 3,000 miles south to the transvolcanic mountain range of central Mexico. Rather than using powered flight, they catch the warm air currents that allow them primarily to soar, which conserves energy. When they arrive in Mexico, they find the south-facing slopes of high mountains and settle on branches and trunks of fir trees, where they form dense clusters and sometimes cover the entire tree in butterflies. As temperatures begin to drop, they go into a state called torpor, which is similar to a hibernation. In this state, they are absolutely surrounded by others, but not interacting. The whole process is just about the butterfly surviving the winter, and they stay this way from early November until March. At that point, their sexual organs have matured, and longer, warmer days tell their bodies that it's time to become active again. They begin the long flight home, where they mate and lay their eggs and begin to start another annual cycle, starting with the first generation of summer monarchs. So let's unpack this a little bit. The monarch person's life basically involves frantic activity, symbolized by all the eating done by the caterpillar, no overt activity, but lots of internal activity, symbolized by the caterpillar liquefying and reforming in its chrysalis, more frantic activity, symbolized by the mature butterfly as it tries to find a mate and reproduce before it dies, a period of feeling as though one has to start over from scratch, represented by death of the butterfly and the birth of its eggs, several repeats of this whole cycle, then intense activity that, while it's demanding, really just seems to flow, as though you're just coasting, represented by that southbound migration. Then 5 solid months of doing absolutely zilch, and then a more demanding period of activity, represented by the return migration northward. These are not consistently active people, but nor are they consistently layabouts. In the same vein as all those contrasts we talked about earlier, these people really are all or nothing folks in the activity department. They are either doing, or they are laying about doing nothing, sometimes struggling just to manage day-to-day chores. trying to force themselves to be consistently active, or conversely, to slow down when they don't want to, is only going to make them miserable because they are innately tuned to the patterns of activity and inactivity that are best for them. With regard to that extraordinarily long journey, at least once in their lifetimes, these people need to take a big trip. Now, most butterfly people are restless and always flitting about somewhere, even if their explorations are more mental than physical. But in this case, they need to go someplace further than they ever would have dreamed, and they should spend more than just a few days there. This trip should represent a vacation in the purest sense of the word, something that lets them unplug from the demands of reality, relax, and introspect. And while they may go with other people, a lot of other people potentially, they need to stay self-focused. This trip is likely to represent a huge turning point for them, something that yields understandings about themselves that far surpass any they've experienced before, and something that causes them to really feel like grown-ups, even if they've already technically been grown-ups for years and years. Something that provides a sense of true maturity. At the end of the monarch butterfly's time in Mexico, this fourth generation has matured physiologically, and it's ready to mate and produce children. So as a result, monarch people in their 40s who have never wanted to have kids may suddenly feel as though a switch has flipped and they are ready to start a family. This can be really, really jarring when it happens because the urge seems to come out of nowhere and it's potent. Now, not every monarch person suddenly wants to be a mommy or daddy at this time, nor do all those that do feel this desire actually decide to have kids. But it's important to know that the urge is perfectly natural and correct for them. On the other hand, instead of an urge to have children, the monarch person may be absolutely possessed by a new and more insistent drive than ever before to create something profound. There's a saying among the women in my family that, quote, life begins at 40. And each of us who's enjoyed that milestone, myself included, have found that to be true. Sometimes this means that by 40, one has finally achieved unfiltered recognition of who one truly is and the courage to be that person. And so subsequent creative endeavors are born of the true self and not the mask of selfhood that one wore to feel safe or accepted in life. And so rather than having biological children, the monarch person may begin to give birth to the offspring of the soul. Again, kiddos and art, music, writing, whatever form the products of your creativity take, begin in the same chakra. Lastly, there are a number of ways that the monarch migration is of unique significance to the native culture of Mexico, but there's one in particular that I'd like to mention here. The return of the monarchs coincides with Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, and the native Purépecha Indians believe monarchs are the souls of their deceased ancestors, returning briefly to visit them. Isn't that beautiful? Monarch people often seem to possess wisdom they shouldn't have, things they never learned in this lifetime or with which they simply haven't had any experience, and yet, inexplicably, they know. This may be because they're able to access the wisdom of their ancestors more easily than the rest of us. These folks also tend to be really freaking psychic. My friend for whom this video was made is among them. Most of my guidance does not come from what would commonly be termed conventional sources, so very little in the intuitive department surprises me anymore. I make my living as a psychic in part. And yet, my friend will regularly shock me by saying or doing something that relates exactly to what I am going through, though she could not possibly have known. It's like a part of them isn't quite here, but is drifting in the ether with all the souls and spirits going to and fro each day, and they're just picking up things from the cosmic sea of what is, what was, and what will be, and bringing them back into 3D reality with the rest of us. What tends to really get you is how innocently matter-of-fact they are about the delivery of this information. Butterflies are creatures of air, and air is about thought and logic, even amidst the ecstatic flow of creativity. There's no real psychic show or drama here. They just say or do things that tell you that they are innately channeling spirit for the rest of us, and they may not even be aware they're doing it. So I hope this has helped those of you who resonate with Monarch Butterfly to better understand yourselves in your journey. Remember that if there's a video that you want to see, become a channel member at the 2nd or 3rd tier and your request will be added to the official video request list from which I draw possibilities for the next video. When I'm ready to make a new one, I'll pick 3 animals from the request list. 3rd tier members will get to vote for the one they want, and that's the video I'll make next. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Cheers!